Welcome. Welcome to another episode of Taboo Talk Podcast, featuring your very own pastor, me, Lady Charmaine Day. Today's show is guaranteed to be full of sensitive, intimate, natural conversations rarely talked about in the spiritual community. So get ready for a good time. Are you ready? Today, we are blessed to have Eric Weaver, CEO of Overcoming the Darkness and author as well, on the show. He will be sharing with us his testimony and 21 pearls. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching today. It's because of you that this show is successful. And I just want to thank you for taking time out to be here. You are wanted and appreciated by me, and you are so special. Thank you. So now I'm going to bring on our guest star, Eric Weaver. Help me help you by welcoming Eric Weaver. Eric, how
Thank
are
you very
you?
much. Thank you so much for having me. Doing great. Thank you so much.
Eric, you are a CEO and author, and you've been through so much. Can you share with us your story?
Oh, certainly, absolutely. I have a long story, and sometimes I share for hours and hours, so it'll be tough to get it under 30 minutes. So absolutely. Um, I entered law enforcement. I certainly have a childhood and teenagehood that we could talk about, but my life really involves around the issues surrounding law enforcement. My years in that, I entered law enforcement in 1983 at the ripe old age of 20 years old, where I realized that my girlfriend at the time was going to have a baby, so I needed a real job. So I started working. I worked in the corrections field. I worked in a county jail for a couple of years, and then in 1985, I transferred up to the city of Rochester, New York, where I worked for 20 years and became a sergeant in 1992, and did the whole SWAT thing and all that kind of stuff. And but in the fall of 1995, when I was on the SWAT team and doing lots of the macho police stuff that people do, right? Was the first time that I told my wife at the time that I wanted to kill myself. I wanted to kill myself every day. I woke up every day, I wanted to die. And there's a course of lots of things that certainly led up to that, which I can certainly talk about later on as well too. But um, during that time, I was a sergeant in a certain platoon. We did a lot of proactive drug enforcement. We are doing a lot of different kind of things. But for whatever reason, I was never involved in one big giant incident. There are many, 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 many incidents I was involved in over the course of those 12, 13 years at the time. And when I said that to her, certainly we had been married about 9 years at that time, my second wife, and she said, well, you got to get some help. And I said, I'll get some help, but you better not tell anybody about that. And so certainly we talk about stigma around mental health and stigma around suicidal and mental health issues, of everything. So I started seeing a doctor, started seeing a therapist, and started seeing it in the spring of 1996. My suicidality, my propensity to die by suicide became so severe that I was now hospitalized for the first time in an actual psychiatric hospital. And so when I called in sick to work that day, because you have to call in sick, you can't just not show up, right? I certainly didn't say, hi, this is Sergeant Weaver. And I said, hey, Sarge, how you doing? Listen, I'm coming to work today because I'm thinking about killing myself. That I didn't say that. I had back surgery I used to be a competitive bodybuilder, believe it or not. And I just said my back went out doing squats, right? Because there's no stigma around back injuries. There's no stigma around exercise injuries, right? Lots of stigma around suicide and mental illness. So I was in a hospital for about a week or so, and then I was discharged. And they said about a week later, I found myself barricaded in the bathroom of my house. I locked myself in the bathroom of my house. I was banging my head against the toilet. I was screaming and yelling. And my wife at the time calls my doctor and says, Dr. Eric, this is Mrs. Weaver. Eric locked himself in the bathroom. I don't know what to do. So she said, well, stand by the front door, make sure she doesn't run out, and I'll hang up and I'll call 911. Now, as you can imagine, how a very angry, nasty, atheistic, hateful, bitter SWAT team sergeant heard when the police were being called on me. I said, you bring some rookie deputy to my house, they better bring about 20 of them because nobody's taking me out of my own home, right? So eventually, when the police were called, and I wouldn't come out, but I said the only way I'm going to come out of the bathroom is my captain, who I answered directly to at the time, comes to my house and orders me out. So as God would have it, my wife called his house, and he lives about 5 miles from our house, and he came right down and knocked on the door and said, this is Captain Carnes, as I have my book, and time to come out, Eric. I opened the door and I said, yes, sir. Hospitalization number 2. After that hospitalization, and certainly I didn't go to Rochester Hospital because I couldn't go there because what people would, I know people at those hospitals, right? So I went to a hospital way outside of Rochester, and a very small hospital. They basically said, "Well, Mr. Weaver, we're kind of a small hospital. There's not a whole lot we can do for you here, but we got this great day treatment program that we connected you to in Rochester. It's Home Memorial House in Rochester." At that point in time, I realized that I needed to do something different because my back and forth hospitalizations were working. So I started going to a day treatment program. Meanwhile, remember, everybody thinks about with a back injury, right? Except the captain that obviously came to my house, who then told my deputy chief at the time. But so they said, "We got this great day treatment program for you hooked up at Shaw Memorial Hospital in Rochester." I said, "Okay, I'll go." So I started going to day treatment, and you're out there from like 9 o'clock to like 2 o'clock, and you're in different groups and that kind of thing. Well, that lasted about a week, and then I found myself hospitalized for a third time for my thoughts of suicide and my actions around suicide. And this time I was in Rochester. This time for 2 or 3 weeks. In the summer of 1996 and all of 1996, I was hospitalized 5 times altogether. Um, there was one hospitalization. I think I was being discharged from my fourth hospitalization. Kind of give you an idea of where my mind was at as I'm being wheeled out and being discharged. And here comes my wife and two of my daughters coming down and come pick me up. And I looked at the nurse that discharged me and I said, and I was just being discharged, right? So I looked at the nurse and I said, "If you allow me to get into this van, this is what I'm going to go home and do." And then laid out my suicide plan to her. So she turned me immediately around. I was readmitted about a half hour after I was just discharged. During '96, I was diagnosed with major depression. I was diagnosed. I was treatment resistant, meaning the medications they were trying, nothing was working. So that's when my psychiatrist at the time introduced to my family and to myself electroconvulsive therapy, shock treatments. So in 1996, I had about a dozen or so shock treatments to my brain to allow, basically in a layman's terms, kind of to jumpstart my brain and to allow the medication to do what it's supposed to do. So it did, and so it worked out really well. And so I was doing pretty good, and so I was ready to come back to work. And so I came back to work in the fall of 1996, and everything was great. Nobody knew where I was. My confidentiality was kept tremendously, which is a huge fear for so many people that if everybody's going to know, everybody's going to find out. In Rochester, we have a very large 700 person department, so but nobody knew. So when I come back to work, guess what everybody's asking me? "Sarge, how's your back? How's your back?" And "Oh, good." I kind of, "Oh, it's pretty good," kind of thing. Well, the couple of years went by and that kind of thing, and there was some issues and things that came up, and I found myself hospitalized again in 1998. What happened was I had brought myself into the locker room after some issues and some incidents happened. I put myself in the locker room way in the back, and I had my gun in my hand for about the 50th time, and I was ready to die by suicide, and I heard some water running in the locker room area, in the bathroom area of the locker room. I heard some water running, and I put my gun back in my holster, and I walked out, and there's nobody at the sink. So that day, my life was saved by water running from a sink that nobody was standing at.
Wow.
And so I went up and called my wife, and I said I have to the hospital again. So I was hospitalized once again in 1998. So luckily, just for one time. And so I came back to work again, and still the back injury thing, and then during that time, my wife who was going to a church in a small town by us, and what I was, I never grew up in any kind of faith community. I never grew up in anything, never believed in anything, or was taught anything. And but she was going to a church at a time, and she wanted me to join. So just to appease her, I started going, and I was actually singing in the choir. Somebody thought I could sing, so here you can imagine this very angry atheistic person with a red choir robe on singing songs about Jesus and all that kind of stuff, right? When I didn't believe a word that I was singing. I was just doing it to appease my wife. Well, there's an older very stately pastor that always wore the black robe, and it was a very stately man, right? Somebody, when you look at him, he's got to be a pastor. There's nothing, no other thing, the way he would look. Well, he had visited me over and over at the hospital, and just not talked about anything, just visited me and just talked, and "How are you?" kind of thing. And so we started talking. I said, "I don't, I'm trying so hard. I'm trying so hard to understand this. I'm trying to understand. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what God wants. I don't even know what anybody's asking of me. And he says to me, he goes, Eric, stop trying so hard.
Mm.
Just let go and let God talk to you. And I'm like, let God talk? What does that mean? Right. So one thing that happened in the year 2000, and John Wesley talks about a lot, is that his heart was strangely warmed. It wasn't a lightning bolt minute. It wasn't a big thunder cloud. It was like little by little by little, I went, oh, so that's what you mean. And so after that, I gave my life to Christ, and it was really quite a turning point in my life. So going from a very angry, devout, I said, oftentimes I call myself an atheistic agnostic. I didn't believe in God, and even if there was, I didn't care. To someone who's now given his life to Christ, and so
Praise
I didn't know anything about it, so I started taking classes, and I knew right then and there my call to ministry. So I didn't know anything about anything. I'm taking as many classes I can do, and started going to a college and taking ordination classes through the Wesleyan Church, all this other stuff. So, but that's during work time. Um, Around 2003, a police officer that I worked with died by suicide. And I knew right then and there that God had not saved me from all my own suicide attempts and thoughts and that kind of stuff, just to keep it to myself. So it's kind of like, okay, Eric, what do you do with all that information? So I went to my command staff and I asked them if I could have 10 minutes on their agenda. The command staff is where the captains and deputy chiefs and the chiefs all sit around and talk about stuff. And I said, can I have 10 minutes on your agenda? I need to tell all of you something. And so I went there and I told them the same story I just told you about my hospitalizations and my suicidality. And I just told them everything I told you. And I said, please let me put together some kind of program, some kind of something, some kind of presentation that I can share my story and talk about with other officers the challenges that we're facing with not only suicide, but with so many other cumulative stress and traumas and family issues and substance use and just so many different things. And for one thing, they're actually looking at, excuse me, one thing they're kind of, first thing they looked around and go, why didn't we know any of this? And the captain and deputy said that basically it was none of your business kind of thing, right? As Eric was getting help, and we trusted that he was getting help, and he showed he was getting help, which is a big deal for not only for people but for in law enforcement. We're not very good at asking for help because most of us are made up of men, and men in general don't ask for help a whole lot. Then you throw in the stigma of all of that involved, right? And so I laid out that story to them, and I said, please let me do something. I had one captain look at me with all the, I know what his intention was, but he goes, Sergeant, I said, he goes, you cannot get up in front of 700 officers and tell them you're in a psychiatric hospital 6 times. And I looked at him and I said, Captain, why not? And he looked at me and he goes, Sergeant, what would people say? And I said, Captain, that's the problem. You and I are so concerned with what the strangers think about us. They're willing to throw away our families, willing to throw away our careers, and sometimes willing to throw away our very lives.
Mm.
I had 17 years on the job at the time, and I said, if people don't like Eric Weaver by now, they're not gonna. And I said, it's not about me, it's about them. At the time, we had a brand new deputy chief of administration, Dr. Cedric Alexander, who was our deputy chief, who had been involved in a lot of EAP and officer assistance kind of stuff. And he had recognized the need for mental health understanding, mental health training for law enforcement. And he gave me full permission to do a course that at the time I called the Emotional Safety and Survival to all 700 of us. And so I've now taught that class that I've renamed Overcoming the Darkness, that I similar to the same name in my book. It's about 35, 40,000 police officers and first responders over the last 18 years. So that's a really big deal. So thank you very much. And so after I started sharing my story of mental health and mental illness, we had some challenges in Rochester, and we realized that we needed to learn how to deal with people who have mental illnesses much better. We need to learn how to train police officers how to respond to those who have mental health issues, that kind of thing. So I created the first crisis intervention team. At the time, we called it Emotionally Disturbed Person Response Team, but it's a crisis intervention team. I created the first crisis intervention team along with Dr. Alexander at New York State in 2004. So I've been training police officers on how to not only deal with their own stuff, but how to respond to individuals that have mental health issues and are suicidal as well too for the last 16 years.
That's
Put
excellent.
teams together. Thank you. Put teams together. Been very very blessed to be in a position to have been able to put teams together all over New York State and that kind of thing. So I retired in 2005 after 22 years at the ripe old age of 42
Mm.
because I knew I was going right into the ministry. So I became the executive and counseling pastor at in a Wesleyan church in a small town next to Rochester, where I served for 5 years. And in 2010, God really touched my heart to kind of, because I was doing so much police training and so much other suicide intervention training that I was working 50 hours at the church and 30 hours training stuff. So something had to give. So I was really glad to kind of just start, leave the local church and just kind of go on to be able to talk all over the place as opposed to working full time at a church. So ever since then, we've been training and working and teaching and traveling and teaching and traveling and training some more. But one thing that's really important to realize is that just because I retired doesn't mean my mental illnesses went away.
Right.
Just like we talk about mental illnesses as medical conditions, this didn't go away because I was hospitalized once when I was a pastor. I was hospitalized in 2008 when I was a pastor. So when I was in the department, when I gave presentations on our CAT, I would be in full uniform, my badge, my medal, my gun, all that kind of stuff, and I would say, "My name is Sergeant Eric Weaver, commanding officer of our CAT, and I'm mentally ill." And people are
Mm.
like, "Oh my gosh, how can you say such a thing?" Well, I know a lot of cops that got diabetes too. I know a lot of cops have heart problems. I just happen to have a mental illness.
Wow.
I have a brain disorder. Doesn't make me a bad person, make me a human being, right? 1 out of 5. I just happen to be one of those 1 out of 5. And I did the same thing when I was a pastor. My name's Eric Weaver, executive pastor at Crossroads Wesleyan Church, and I'm mentally ill. Well, how could you say that as a pastor? Shouldn't you just pray harder? Well, I know a lot of Christians that got diabetes too. All
Hello.
right. And so same thing. So I have a brain disorder. It's the most complex organ in our body, sometimes breaks down too. And then I was hospitalized again in 2014, and I was hospitalized again in 2017, this time in a trauma disorder center. Where I was in 2013, I was finally diagnosed correctly after major depression, bipolar disorder, so many different things I was misdiagnosed with. That all of that stuff, all of the depression, all that kind of stuff was actually really post-traumatic stress disorder from
Wow.
serving 22 years and seeing things that people just shouldn't see and experiencing things that people just shouldn't experience. So I also had severe obsessive compulsive disorder, which led to a lot of suicidal thoughts. And then in 2017, when I went to the trauma disorders in Baltimore, was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, how your brain works of the compartmentalizing things, that kind of thing. So yeah, so it's been quite a journey. It continues to be a journey. I'm in treatment, will be the rest of my life. I have no doubt about that. Some people aren't. Some people want it short term, and it's wonderful. I just know personally, I just know this is my journey, and I've accepted that, and I understand it, and it is what it is, and that's okay. Some days are really good, some days aren't. But it's a journey that you continue to walk. And when I talk and share my story, people they have those stigmas running, mental illness, crazy and nuts and whack job and cray cray and all that kind of stuff, right? And I've said so many times to my audiences, whether it be a group of 30 or a group of 1,000, um, that oftentimes when you talk about 1 out of 5 people in the United States have some kind of mental health disorder, people get real nervous, like I'm gonna start cutting up by fives, right? One, two, three, four, five. Oh, it's you. One, two, three, four, five. Oh, you're the one. And people are pointing back and forth to the bosses and laughing and joking and that kind of stuff. And then I say, well, what if I said this? What if I said 1 out of 5 people in this room will be diagnosed the next year with leukemia? And I
Mm.
started cutting up by fives. And all of a sudden faces get really drawn and they just kind of look down. And I said, how come nobody's laughing? I said, because leukemia is not funny, is it? Well, as someone who's been hospitalized 9 times for being suicidal and dealing with so many people who are mentally ill, mental illness isn't funny either.
That's right.
And so they recognize that, and they realize, and they kind of do some soul searching themselves of, I'm laughing at a medical condition that people don't choose.
Mm.
That people don't choose to have depression. People don't choose to be mentally ill. People don't choose to live with schizophrenia. People live with it, and it's a medical condition like anything else. And so when I say that to my classes, they truly do. I think they get it. Then I say, well, if I was to start cutting my files of mental illness, I'm one. I'm one, and I start off with me, right? And hopefully that really, and I start off almost every class the same way, to really get the understanding going immediately
Excellent.
regarding my personal intake on or personal take on mental illness, and having responded to so many people. Because when we look at other medical conditions, what words do we use for other medical conditions? We use like brave and strong and courageous and survivor and resilient, all words that are very, very true and very well deserved. And the words we use for mental illness, they're just medical condition, crazy, nuts, and psycho, and those kind of things, right? Um, but working with the mentally ill for the last 17, 18 years firsthand, and for even before that, but specifically for the last 17, 18 years, I've never seen such brave and strong and courageous people in my life.
Yeah.
To get up every day despite so many challenges, get through the day, do their life, get through, take a bus to a appointment, and get another bus, and don't know how to, living under a bridge, whatever the case may be. Some brave, strong, courageous people. And I as a peer advocate as well too, to really realize that some of these individuals who live with severe mental illnesses, or even not so severe mental illnesses, are some really brave, strong people.
Yeah.
um, so it's really, really important for the world to know that, is that those words belong to the mentally ill too, and that's a really important thing for people to hear. So I continue to train. I'm a like I said, like you said, the director of my own consulting business, Overcoming the Darkness. I just wrote my book, Overcoming the Darkness, which has a lot of connotations to it, right? So it's actually overcoming the darkness, shining light on the issues of mental illness, trauma, and suicide in law enforcement, specifically my book. So, but that's our tagline. I remember I was running. I was running back when I used to be able to run. I was running, and I'm like, what could I name my? I'm trying to think of a name, and I know God spoke to me clearly, and I'm running and I'm jogging. I'm like, overcoming the darkness. Yeah, shining light on the issues of mental illness and suicide. Oh my! And I ran home as fast as I could, and wrote it down before I forgot it. And that's been our thing ever since. So it's really been a wonderful journey. And the challenge, one other challenge that I don't talk about a lot, just not for any reason. Over the last few years, I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and so my brain has now a neurological disorder as well too. And once again, when I share that, people understand that. They go, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." When I share my mental illnesses, it's still like, "What? How can you talk about that?" And so one disorder is acceptable, the other one's like, well, that's weird, So how can you be so honest and share all that stuff? And because that's me, and that's what God saved me from that. And I continue to live with mental illness. God could go, it's gone, go away, but it's not, and that's okay. All the things I've experienced in my life has brought me to where I am today. So, um, good or bad, all the good things, all the bad things, all the really, really bad things, brought me to who I am today. So, I still continue with my trauma issues. I still have nightmares and flashbacks and that kind of stuff. But when I retired in 2005, my trauma, my PTSD, really didn't start coming out until well after 6 or 7 years after I retired. So
Wow.
when I talk about the issues around trauma, trauma can affect somebody immediately after, and trauma can affect someone years later.
Yes.
And the reason I have complex PTSD is because there's so many incidents versus one incident. There's just so many. So there's so many issues of trauma, even in childhood. So yeah, so that's really in a nutshell where I am today, and what brought me here today. And so continue to fight the good fight and share as much as I can about my life with others, and hopefully help save lives and change lives along the way. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much it. It's I
Wow.
could I could go on for a couple more hours, but that's pretty. I wrapped it up pretty quickly to be able to not. So
Yes. I tell you, thank you so much for sharing. I know your
absolutely.
story touched someone. It touched me just now.
Mm-hmm.
It was very powerful. It's always good to get the male perspective on
Mm-hmm.
mental illness.
Sure. Sure.
I have mental
Absolutely.
illness. I have bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So people are used to me sharing my story.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that with me too. So.
You're welcome. But to hear it from a man and to hear it from a law enforcer is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
very, very powerful. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Thank
much.
you. Absolutely. Actually, and it's funny you mentioned that coming from men. I was an article in Time magazine back in 2003 or so four-ish, and the name of the article in Time was "Real Men Get the Blues."
Yes.
And so we talked about that a little bit. That was in a Reader's Digest article. The name was "The Secret That Men Won't Admit." And so that's I've been in a couple articles that talk all about how men don't share,
They don't.
and that we real men, quote unquote, get the blues too. Real
Yes.
men, we have a secret now, that is the anger and depression we deal with. So yeah, so that's what's kind of unique about some of those articles about specifically about men, because we don't talk about stuff. In law enforcement, we don't talk about stuff, because what would people say?
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be like that. I'm not supposed to be that, because I don't want to be perceived as weak, or that I can't handle it, or I'm not tough enough, and that kind of stuff. And one thing that I found also is that, just like I said, with courageous, and some of the toughest people I've ever met are people that are actually able to walk through the door of a mental health place and say, I need help.
Mhm.
That's some of the courageous people I've ever met.
Me
But
too.
that's hard to get it. That's hard to walk in that door the first time.
Yes, it
It
is.
takes courage, almost like a church, right? Sometimes it takes courage to walk in the door the first time, and once you do, you realize that first time is leads, hopefully, leads to a second, third, fourth time. It gets easier along the way.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's my journey that continues on.
Thank you for sharing your journey.
Absolutely.
And we learned so much about you. It's so worthwhile.
Thank you
And
very much.
Eric, people from your terrific story about mental health issues and living with mental health, what did you learn? What are your 21 pearls of lessons that you want to share with us on top of what you already shared? You
Oh,
already
sure,
gave us some
absolutely.
pearls, but
Right,
what pearls of
absolutely.
wisdom?
Sure, I wrote some of them down, and some of them I have in my book, and some I wrote down special, and I had actually shortened the list. At first, I thought 21. Oh my gosh! I realized I had more than 21. Uh, but I think the very first one for listeners, and especially in the faith community, the very number one is that know how much you are loved by God.
Yes.
I think that's a huge one. I actually had one person, and it was very, very sad. It just broke my heart. That she would come into church and she'd have panic attacks. Every time she walked in the door of the church, she would have a panic attack. And people were like, oh, she's just seeking attention, kind of thing. But I realized something was really wrong, right? And so I asked her, I said, why, what's happening? I mean, this went on for months and months and months and months. And she goes, I don't think God loves me. And I said,
Mhm.
why would you think that? She goes, because I told a pastor one time that I was depressed. And he said, well, that means that God doesn't really love you. And
Oh,
I thought to myself, oh my gosh.
wow.
And that she took that with her from a pastor, says, because you're struggling with depression, God must not love you.
That's horrible.
And it just broke my heart for this woman who was struggling so hard just to make it through day by day. And to hear that someone said that to her
Mm.
just broke my heart. And so when you look at stigma, right, there's stigma out in the community, and there's tremendous stigma in the faith community, right,
Yes.
surrounding mental illness. That it's just a weakness, or it's a demonic possession, or whatever, right? Or just pray your way out of it. But we don't say that about any other medical conditions, right?
That's the truth.
Somebody has a broken leg, we say, we'll pray over you, but we also take you to the doctor, right? We'll pray for you, but you go get your leg fixed. And so so I think the number one thing is to realize how much you love by God, and whether you feel like it or not. And that's another one I'll talk about in a second. But I think the second one talks about that I've had, and I write about and I share about all the time, is to know that you truly are of worth and value.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest indicators, if I've talked about with my classes, I said, if I was to ask each one of you, just me and you on the hallway, has there ever been a time that you just felt worthless? Has there ever been a time that you just felt like nobody really cares? And I said, if you're honest, every one of us will say, yes, there certainly has been. There sometimes still is. And so to make sure that people truly know that, you have worth and you have value, and you have all those things, is really, really important for people to know. Other things we talk about is to understand being honest with yourself and being honest with others, and recognizing, do I need to talk to somebody? Am I recognizing that some of the challenges I'm dealing with are am I struggling? How am I actually doing that? And being honest with yourself, and the third thing being, or the fourth thing, being honest with other people. That doesn't mean spill your guts in front of anybody who says, hey, how you doing today? Because most people ask that question just out of courtesy. They don't really want to know. They just say, hey, how are you? I'm not saying just tell the world your story, but share with somebody, and be honest with yourself, and be honest with other people as well too. Other things we talk about, and I need to put my glasses on for what I wrote down myself, as we talked about, search for some of the causes, search what's causing some of these things. Is it situational? Is it the situation I'm in? Is it my work environment? Is it a medical condition? Is it a spiritual thing? Is a combination of everything? But search for some of those causes and find out what is could be an issue that's causing some of that depression. What's causing some of those situational things? What's causing the feelings of the nightmares and flashbacks? Whatever it may be. What's causing my mood swings? What's causing me to want to stay up for 3 days a week and then crash for what's happening to me, right? So search for some of those causes. The other thing we talk about is take constructive action. It's really important. I throw that word constructive because we're very good as people, we're very good at taking negative action. If I'm having a really bad day, I'll sit on my back and have 4 or 5 glasses of wine. Well, that's not really constructive action. It might make you quote unquote feel better for a few minutes, but we know alcohol is a depressant, so it's biologically impossible to feel better. You might be happily intoxicated for a couple hours, but then you crash. So what do? You drink some more. So what do? You crash. So what do? You drink some more. So once again, to really look at that constructive action, taking some positive courses in your life, whether it be exercise or poetry, whatever it is for you, your own self-care is really, really important. Other thing they talk about is look at how you think and identify some of that distorted thinking. I even wrote in my book, and some of the things like all or nothing thinking, saying things like the whole world hates me and I hate everybody and everything's bad. I'll catch myself saying that to my therapist quite often. I said, oh, I caught myself saying everything or all the time, right? Because it's not all the time. It's not everything. It's not everybody, right? And other things we talk about, and I'm just looking at the overgeneralization and just so many different things, and really disqualifying the positive. Oh, like you would say, oh, you're so inspirational. And I said, no, I'm not. Versus, thank you. And we do
Right.
that all the time to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Other things like, personalization, labeling, and taking things personally, or, I've had so many people, well, you didn't email me right back, so you must be mad at me. No, because I've thought that before too. Well, they didn't text me right away, so something's wrong. What did I do wrong? And so that's all distorted thinking. That's our perception of that's not reality. Sometimes we do that to ourselves. We do it to ourselves a lot. So other things we talk about is that to know that you're human. We're just people. We want to talk about that, especially with law enforcement. We're just people. We're not special. We're just people that got bills, we got spouses and kids, and we're just the same thing with pastors. We're just people.
Hello.
We screw up too. And so that's a reality for so many people. It's really important. Other things I talk about is be really don't we're our worst critic, because we know what's in our heads. We know what our lives have been like, and so watch you really careful, because I have some do's and don'ts, but really work hard not to try to judge yourself,
Yes.
because we can be, like I said, we're our worst critic, and sometimes we're not very kind to ourselves, right? Another thing that is follows up the next one is to really truly be kind to yourself.
Yes.
We're really good at showing grace to other people. We're not so
Amen.
good at showing grace to ourselves.
Amen.
We're way too hard on ourselves than God wants us to be, or other people want us to be. We know the enemy is very good at that too. So this is having those feelings of self-worth and self-doubt and all its expendability and all those kind of things of um, really trying to show grace to yourself that we show other people,
Yes.
or that we're supposed to show other people, right? And the other thing is it's not cliche. It sounds cliche, but it's scriptural. It's to love yourself.
Yes.
We know the two greatest commandments, right? To love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love others, love your neighbors yourself. And when Jesus said that, he didn't say love your neighbors more than yourself. He said love your neighbors as yourself. So he wants you to love you because you're one of God's creations, and that's where that self worth and you're one of his kids,
Hello.
right? Right. And if
Yes.
anybody's got kids out there, you realize you love your kids. They screw up, but you still love them. And I have three daughters. They're now 38, 34, and 30. And
Wow.
I've said to them ever since they're little girls, even in my bad days, I said to them, "There's absolutely nothing you could ever do to make me love you more, and there's nothing you can do to make me love you less.
Wow.
And I love you as a dad. And if I can love my kids, being a just a man, just a sinful person as we all are, imagine how much God loves us." So that
Amen.
goes way back to the number one thing, right? Is to realize how much you're loved. Other things I talk about is focusing on not what you can't do, but focusing on what you can do. We're really good at saying, I can't do that. I can't do this. I can't see that. Focus on what you can do. I can make positive action. I can do these certain things. I can learn how to handle some things. I can learn some new coping skills. I can do those kind of things versus I can't,
Right.
because we're good at that too, right? We're very good at that as well too. Um, Showing yourself compassion, just like showing yourself love, being compassionate to yourself. One of
Hmm.
the things I did in our CIT is actually one of our mission statements. In my mission statement that I wrote every individual CIT member will treat everyone they encounter with dignity, compassion, and respect.
Wow.
And that was on my mission statement. It's the mission statement I give all around the state. And so if I can show others dignity, I need to show that to myself. If I can show others compassion, I need to show it to myself. Like if I show others respect, I need to show that to myself. Because like I said, we're very good for the most part. For most of us, we're really good with strangers. We're not so good with ourselves or even our own family. So that's a challenge too, as well, right? And one of the things we talk about, and I shared a little bit about our feelings, is to really recognize that sometimes feelings lie.
Mm,
The feelings lie to us, especially the negative friends, right? I
yeah.
feel like I'm no good. I feel our feelings lie to us a lot,
Right.
and there's no way we can, because feelings come and go, right? Even feelings of happiness come and go. But our feelings, especially the negative ones, lie to us quite a bit. And we either believe them, or we recognize what they're really saying to us. We know our enemy is very good at that. He goes, you know why? I'm sure he said to me many times, I'm sure he said to you, is that you know why you feel worthless, because you are,
Right.
right. I mean, that's what he does. That's what he does. He's been doing it for a long time.
He's good at it.
So he's an expert at it. That's his job, right?
Right.
Do you know why you feel like God doesn't love you? Because he doesn't, right? And that's what he does. And so realize that those feelings, and sometimes they're our own feeling, right? Not everything's attributed to the enemy, because he'll take credit for anything, but not everything, right? But some of it's just us. Oftentimes it's just us. The other thing I mentioned too is don't expect perfection from yourself,
Mm,
right? We expect perfection in the slightest, tiniest little thing. Screw up. We go, oh, look at me again. I messed up. Um, when I train instructors for mental health first aid to the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, um, or mental wellness, I'm sorry, we look for potential in people. We don't look for perfection in people. We look for passion in people, not perfection in people. So that passion and that potential that all of us have needs to be much more in our minds than trying to be perfect. There's only one perfect person that walked on this earth,
amen.
and that ain't us. And
That's right.
so, and so that's we go back to showing ourselves some grace. and saying, you know, something, I'm working really hard. Sometimes I take 3 steps forward, and sometimes I take 3 steps backwards. But I'm trying, right? And so that's
That's
an
it.
important thing. We move forward, and we're trying, and every day we do that, right? The other thing, and I shared this a little bit, but really important for people to really hear, is to really understand that mental illnesses are medical conditions.
Right.
We know so little about the brain. Uh, the medical community has made tremendous strides in other medical issues and other medical conditions, and people are living much longer. People are living better lives, and where it still has a long way to go is the issue surrounding mental illness. I know I oftentimes when I'll talk to my psychiatrist about why this happens, why that happens, and the answer, he's a very smart man, wonderful guy. Sometimes his answer is, I don't know. It just happens. He'll ask me, you know, I'll ask him, so why does that medication work over this one? His answer, I don't know, it just does. And so once again, you really not even really until they can take a lot of imagery of the brain, and you know, when you look at, if I had a broken arm, first of all, I'd feel the pain. I could see that it was broken. They could put an X-ray up on a machine and say, "Do you see, Mr. Weaver, right there? Your bone is broken." So I have the pain, I can see it, and I can see it on an X-ray. And unfortunately, we don't have that same, for the most part, same kind of technology for the brain. It
Right.
has to go with our signs and symptoms. And what can I do with my signs and symptoms? I can fake it. I can just pretend like everything's okay. I was a pretender for decades.
Mm.
I was a really good pretender. I faked my way through life for a long time until it caught up with me, right? So realizing that mental health issues are real medical conditions. We know that only, and the other thing too, it's another one. I don't know what number I'm on, but the other thing is too is to have, we talk about that courage of walking in the door, right? Um, and really understanding that we know that only mental illnesses, this is another one, mental illnesses are very treatable. We know that 90% of individuals that get treatment for mental illness are treated and live on wonderful lives and want to recover and all those kind of things, and it's great. The problem is only 43% of individuals with mental health issues ever seek treatment. So 43% of only 43% of people with a medical condition seek treatment. Imagine, using the broken leg analogy again, imagine if only 43 people with broken legs 43% ever got help for a broken leg. A lot of people walk around with limps and gangrene and amputations, and but when you look at 57% of individuals don't ever seek treatment.
Mm.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
That's a big number, especially when we know that 1 out of 5. That's a big number. That's millions of people that don't seek treatment. And a lot of it has to do with stigma, which is another one, is to not believe the stigmas that are out there, and don't believe those stigmas that society puts on there. One of them being that people with mental illnesses are violent and dangerous. One thing we truly do know is that individuals who have mental health issues are not any more violent and dangerous than the general population. Matter of fact, we're 8 to 10 more times more likely to be victims of crimes, let alone perpetrators of crimes. But unfortunately, what would the media have you believe? What would Hollywood have you believe?
Mm.
Right? Just the opposite. You know, it makes for a great Halloween movie for the lunatic that escaped from the asylum to go kill teenagers in the woods. That makes for a great Halloween movie, but what does it do to mental illness?
Right.
What does it do to those who are living with mental illness? It does us no good. Matter of fact, it brings us back to the Stone Age again, right? And so certainly realizing that the media in Hollywood are usually no help to those who are mentally ill, because it's rarely ever portrayed as a as a as a as an illness versus a curse or versus a demonic thing, right? And so that's a really big challenge though too. Other thing to talk about is learn, if you're diagnosed with a mental health issue, is to learn about it. It's called psychoeducation, right? You learn it if you're diagnosed, as you mentioned, and like I said, thanks for sharing. You're diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I'm diagnosed with PTSD, and just so that I should be an expert on my own mental illness,
Right.
right? I should be an expert. When someone says, "So what do you have?" I should be able to explain what I have. So that psychoeducation of learning as much about you can to realize, so this is what bipolar is. And so when I can give that elevator speech and say, I have a mental illness, can you share your diagnosis? Yeah, this is what it is, and this is what it looks like, and this is why I have it. to really learn about as much about your own diagnosis. But and same thing if you're a family or friend that has a family member with a mental illness, learn about it. That if it's your son or daughter or mom or dad or brother or sister, learn about their mental illness so you can best learn how to work with them and help them and treat them and get them the help they need. So you learn about it. The
Right.
National Alliance on Mental Illness has a wonderful program called Family to Family, in which family members go and learn about their family members' mental illness, and they can understand and really learn how to help the best. What do I do when my brother lives with schizophrenia? How do I deal with it? How do I talk to somebody who's hearing voices that I don't hear? Well, there's a lot of education out there, and I train police officers on that as well too, a lot, as to how to actually work with someone and help them get the help they need to get and allow them to have the resources available. In the last couple, I think one of the biggest things is to know that recovery is possible.
Yeah.
People do get better. People go and live productive lives and contribute wonderful to society, but recovery looks different for everybody. For some people, recovery is doing podcasts and writing books. For some people, recovery is being able to volunteer at a food cupboard 1 hour a week, and that's their ability to recover. That's wonderful. So recovery looks different for everybody. Recovery isn't all gone away. I actually had when I put a CIT together in someplace I don't remember where it was in New York State someplace. I've never had anybody ask me this question before, and this was just a few years ago. But I had one, I think it was a lieutenant in some police department, says, Eric, it's really good that you talk about your story, but how can somebody who's still so mentally ill talk about recovery? And I never really, I was kind of taken aback from it because nobody, in all my years, nobody really asked me that question before. And I said, for all of us, I think I mentioned, I said, recovery is a process. Recovery doesn't mean it's all over with. Recovery will be a process the rest of my life. And for those who have any type of mental health issue, recovery is a continued thing, just like recovery from, once again, any other medical condition, right? With various things, I might have to go to rehab for a while and learn how to walk again or whatever the case may be. But recovery is a process, and I think it also boils down to the fact that when we look at mental health issues, is that it's not a choice, contrary to what people think, especially when it comes to mental health issues, and especially when it comes to substance use disorders, right? Substance use disorders are huge when it comes to people saying, well, you're the one that took the drink, or you're the one that stuck the needle in your arm. Well, substance use disorders are mental illnesses too, because of what the chemicals do to your brain. So mental illnesses, and we talk about recovery being possible for all those things. But once again, it's not a choice. I don't choose to be mentally ill, and I don't choose, but I can choose my recovery.
Right.
It's just a really important thing. And so that's got to be an individual thing that people choose. And a lot of it boils down to fear and denial and what would people say to not get that help they need to get. So that's why I said a while ago, don't believe the stigmas that are out there, because you're not a weak person. You're a very courageous person by walking in that door.
Yeah.
In the last one, the second to last one, is that know that there's hope. I think that word doesn't get used a lot. That word doesn't get used enough sometimes in our lives. There is hope. Along with recovery, there's hope, and those four letters have a tremendous amount of meaning behind them. When you look at all those different things, we look at scripture, we look at so many different things. We're given so many promises of hope. We're given so many promises of love, and so many promises. And one thing we know about God is that He says what He means, and He means what He says. And when He says "I love you," He's not saying, "Well, only on certain days." When He says, right, I only love you on the good days. Well, then I don't. Then I fall short every single day. I don't know about you, but I count on His grace to carry me through, right?
Right.
And then the last thing, especially because of the issue surrounding suicide, we know that 90% of those who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental health disorder at the time of their death, which means mental illnesses can be fatal. The fatality of mental illness is called suicide. And so that's a challenge, and I struggle often with suicidal thoughts myself. And I'm getting different treatments and ketamine infusions now, and those kind of things of continue to work on my own issues of suicide. And that's a reality. I speak openly about that. I wish they would all just go away, but sometimes they're still there. But the last thing I have to say is, second to last thing, is really, as hard as it may be, to choose life.
Amen.
My being today may be my birthday. Um,
Happy
my
birthday.
thank you. I had to squeeze that in there, right? My daughter, my middle daughter, Danielle, wonderful, wonderful woman, and just a great mom, a great daughter. She actually texted me today a happy birthday text, and at the bottom of this, I'm gonna tear up if I do, forgive me. But at the bottom of her text, she goes, "Dad, I really see."
Oh,
She said, "Dad, I thank you for choosing life every day."
oh,
And
and
for your daughter to say that to you about, thank you for choosing life, um,
that's
for
beautiful.
someone who's suicidal, it lives with suicide, for my daughter to say that, and she, at the end of that, she goes, "I don't know what I would do without you."
Oh,
And so that was quite a heart jerker this morning at
yes.
6:15 a.m. She was the first one. She always wants to be the first one to say it, right? But for her to say that in the exact same day that I'm doing this podcast with you and giving those 21 pearls, for her to thank me for choosing life, that was an important one for all of us to hear.
That's beautiful.
And then I go back to number one again, all over again, to start right in the very beginning. The number one thing is to know how much you love God, how much God loves you, and the very last thing, know how much God loves you. And so it's going to kind of wrap it all up with both things from the beginning and at the end, because it's one of those important things that, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we fall short,
Mhm.
the love of God endures forever. And so, even on days that we don't feel like it. And so that's an important thing. So thank you very much for allowing me to. I don't know if that was 21 or not. I think there's maybe more than 21, but that was but a lot of the information is very, very true. And when I look at that list that I just gave you and all those different things, um, I'll be honest with you. I wrote them for me,
Yes.
right? I wrote them for me because I need to hear them too. So I'm never the one to say, "Oh, go do this, go do this." I wrote them all for me. When I wrote my book because I needed to hear it too. When I talk about all the principles for overcoming the darkness in my book, I wrote them for me too, because and I'll keep this list forever, because I have to remind myself of these things, and that's okay.
It is okay.
That's okay. And yeah, so thank you so much for this time, and thank you for this is, I consider this a birthday present to myself. You're I consider this your present to me. So thank you so much
Oh,
for this
thank you,
opportunity. I really
Eric.
appreciate that.
And Eric,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for sharing your 21 pearls of wisdom.
Thank you very much.
They
Thanks for
were
allowing
so
me.
helpful. And to anyone listening, it was so informative, helpful, inspiring,
Mm,
uplifting, and definitely needed.
mm.
Thank you so much, Eric.
My honor, ladies and gentlemen, my honor.
Eric, can you share with us your social media URLs and your website URL?
Absolutely. Our website is, believe it or not, Overcoming the Darkness, right? www.overcomingthedarkness.com. We have three Facebook pages, or by Overcoming the Darkness Facebook page. And I also have an Overcoming Darkness for Law Enforcement Facebook page, which I have out there as well too. So also on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn is out there as well too. So I have a lot of contacts out there working diligently to spread the word on mental health and mental illness, and suicide prevention as well too. And so, if you go to my website, there's links to all those things. There are links to articles, links to the training we provide, links to all the articles that I mentioned earlier. They're all on our website as well too. So, my wife, who is our website designer, has done an amazing job, and
Nice.
like
It's
things like my
beautiful.
bio and all that kind of stuff is all on there. So
It is
anything you ever,
beautiful.
yeah, thank you so much. And anything you ever wanted to know is on that website. So it's all links to everything else. So that's the place to go, overcomingthedarkness.com.
All right. And is there any final thoughts you would like to add before we close today?
Be safe and be well. And may God bless every single one of you, every single day, every single minute. Enjoy each moment at a time, enjoying each day at a time, knowing how tremendously loved you are.
Amen. Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Eric, thank you so much for coming on Taboo Talk.
And
And
I truly appreciate it.
will you come back again?
I certainly will. Anytime you ask.
All right.
Anytime you ask, I'll be back again. I'll talk about anything. I can talk for a long time. So you just let me know what you want me to talk about, and I'll do it.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much. You have a
Uh,
wonderful day. Thank you so much.
you too. And enjoy the rest of your
I
birthday.
will. I will. I will. Absolutely. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you
God
for what
bless you.
thank you for what you do, by the way. Thank you very much for what you do. It's a very important thing. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. And listen, watcher and listener of Taboo Talk, Eric came on the show because you are special and you
Mhm.
deserve the best life possible.
Mhm.
Eric shared his time, his information, all for free for you as his gift to you to help you overcome the darkness.
Thank you very much.
And if
Absolutely.
you have the chance, show your love to Eric. Go
Mhm.
buy his book, go visit his website, have him come and do a training at your workplace. There's so many more things you can do to keep in touch with Eric.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
responds to his email. So
Mhm.
please reach out and touch him. Let him know you're coming from Taboo Talk to Eric.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you. All
Thank you.
right.
And one thing I want to share with you is that I have wrote 3 books,
Oh, wonderful.
8 books, but 2 of them tell my testimony.
Mhm.
Size 7.5, walk about in my shoe and he's simple. And my pearls of wisdom is in Lady Day's Pearls of Wisdom.
Oh, very nice. Thank
Yes,
you for sharing that. I'll look that up myself.
thank you. And
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
encourage everyone to get their autographed set of 3 books because they really go together as a
Wonderful.
unit.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you so much.
also, to do this is supporting the ministry. Your purchases help me continue to fund my Taboo Talk ministry, to fund my Unlimited Help Online ministry, and to continue to reach out. So
Mm.
thank you in advance for making your purchase. And lastly, thank you so much for watching the show. God bless your precious heart for watching and being a part of Taboo Talk. You are the reason why Taboo Talk is successful. Well, until next time, take care of yourself, stay special. Goodbye.